I totally remember, like, I was definitely the kind of kid where, like, the minute I got into a library or a bookstore, I was like, so where's your gay section? Like, I was going to find out where the gay section was and read whatever.
I had. Ooh.
I would read whatever I could get my hands on. So I remember, and this is kind of later in high school. I went to find this book. I think the book was called Geography Club. And I went to like check the book out. I was like, this is the first one I'm about to take home. Like, this is it. All right, we're serious about this. God is watching, and I'm committed to this action. And I remember going to check it out in the library, and sweet woman, very nice, brings it out. And then she looks at me. We had this moment. She's just like, I heard this is a very good book. I was like, girl, don't read me. Can you just give me my book, please? Like, if you could just hit check out and I could be on my way. But I just remember, how badly I wanted to see something. And that's something it didn't have to be good. It didn't have to be groundbreaking. It didn't have to be moving. I just wanted to see something. I just wanted to see someone. That was so important to me. And I don't think I've developed a taste level until very recently. And that's only because now I'm like, oh, there's more than 3 and 4 books now. So I guess I can be picky. But as you're reading, like, what do you think makes what are you reading for? Like, when are you like, okay, now we're doing something. Now this is working for me. What do you think you're reading for when you're reading books with LGBTQ characters?
So I think, like with any book, there are ways in which I'm looking for a mirror. And there are I don't want to say so few, but what I find is a lot of the queer characters that I read are like somebody watched a lot of movies with bad queer characters in them, and then like embodied all of that as like their knowledge of what queer folks are, and then decided to write a queer character. And so there are just many ways in which like the experience is not my experience. Like, so I'll just jump in and say, like, one of the huge things that I hate is when like the discovery of the character's sexuality like happens in this like extremely fit of passion, this like romantic sexual encounter, and it's like this like great sexual moment, and it's like, ta-da, I'm gay, and it's like, but how, Sway? Like, that's it's just maybe that is somebody's reality, and good for them. good for whoever had really great gay sex the first time out, and it opened their eyes to the wonders of what love and romance were. But that's not the experience that I have had, or any of the folks that are in my life have had.
It's not realistic.
It's like it only happens in books, and I don't know why. Because straight folks get like the clumsy first kiss, and they get like I planned my outfit for 2 hours the night before, and then I ran away from him when I saw him in the cafeteria. Like, and of course I read mostly young adult fiction, so you'll hear references to always in cafeterias. But like,
right,
straight characters get to be awkward, but queer folks, it's like, bam, I figured it out, and it was perfect in the right moment. And any number of things can happen like after that, but that initial like discovery of sexuality is this completely unrealistic thing that I can't deal.
No, I think you made a lot of phenomenal points. I think you're definitely like in the right neighborhood, right? I love what you mentioned about like, straight characters get sort of like the luxury of clumsiness, right? And I think of like, as I'm reading for myself, and what I think a younger version of me wanted to see was like, there was always these stories that were so focused on like, hyper awareness of who I am, right? These like queer characters who were like realizing a lot very, very quickly. And I needed the luxury of clumsiness. I still need the luxury of clumsiness. Like, I'm still looking for characters who have no idea what they're doing, right? I want to see some characters who've got some skin in the game, who have been in this for a minute, they pay some bills, and they still don't have a clue what is going on. Like, that to me is where I'm reading from. And, I think when we talk about literature involving LGBTQ characters, we're always, we're always waiting for sort of like catharsis. Like, when are you learning about yourself? When are you realizing in a way that like y'all did not ask this from like any number of characters we gave romantic comedies to, right? You did not ask any of these women to realize anything until the last couple pages of a book, right? And suddenly I have to process trauma. I have to process my past and the like unclear present and what I want from the future. We ask queer characters to do a lot, and that's not what I'm ready for.
Much trauma. Just so much trauma.
Why must they? So yeah, no, I think you definitely hit the nail right on the head.
There's a book, it's called Fun Home. It's a graphic novel, and it gets so many things wrong. But one of the things that it does really well is it lets the protagonist like discover her sexuality in a way that feels authentic. Like she's at the library doing research and like, what does this word mean? And like finding all the new terms for genders and sexualities and being like, okay, I tried this on, that didn't fit. I am the person that I'm seeing. We had long conversations about what it means to show up in this way, in ways that were not tied to like, that were tied to romance, but not necessarily to sex. Where like the process of figuring out her sexuality was like a cerebral experience as well. I was like, yes, let a girl do some research.
Good. Yeah.
Time in the library, and it's just fantastic to read that.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the many, because I'm trying to find the balance, right? I hear what you're saying, especially about characters having like a cerebral experience. And yes, and wanting my characters. So one of the books that maybe in a similar sense to maybe Fun Home, so Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda was something that came out after I was done with my teenage years, right? And so I got to revisit it from this place of like, not like, oh, I know better, but like, what matters to you know, someone who might be experiencing this now and today. And I think in a very similar way, you see Simon, the sort of main character, having this experience that in many ways can be very cerebral, right? It can be very maybe internal. Like, what is this character? We're very, very close to the way Simon is thinking about himself and thinking about his friend groups and thinking about the world around him, and what the sort of repercussions of actions and folks knowing what that's going to do. You see this very sort of cognitive moment, lots of cognitive moments happening with Simon. And while I enjoy it, I'm here for it. I'm here for self-aware, gaze. I also love for my characters to be willing to figure it out as they go, but they have to go, right? Like, I remember how awkward, attempting to love even folks I didn't know, right? I think sort of, the internet or that messaging kind of plays a large part in Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda, which later became the movie Love, Simon. So I understood how awkward and how strange that all felt. And there was, while I want to see my characters have these cerebral moments, I also want to see them have moments where they are trying and messing up really, 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 really bad. Because that to me is very queer. That to me is very young and very queer. Going to college and seeing folks who, for the first time in their life, they thought they were going to love for the first time. And they're not being in their mind about it. They're being full human beings about it. They're being in their bodies about it. They're being in their mind about it. They're being, they're challenging themselves in ways that are mental and spiritual, right? Like, I want to see very complex moments happen for queer characters. And sometimes I think that authors give me one moment without sometimes caring if these characters get the other moments too.
I think having a character with complex moments requires a complex character in general. And there are so many times where the singular queer person in the entirety of what seems like a very straight universe exists only to either provide some sort of like moral standing for an otherwise asshole main character, or exists just to be this like beacon of I know everything about art and literature and film and science, and also randomly have this physics degree
Right.
because I hold all the things. So you have this like, I don't know, this sort of like a sage character. Like
Yeah.
the queerness exists to hold all this other knowledge that regular people just don't have on hand. And so in that space, you can't have a complex moment in your own inner life because you only exist to provide the information or the scaffolding for the other characters to have complex inner
Ab-
lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't know what trope that's called, but I want to research it further where a queer character exists only to help other characters get to their next level, right? Like it's in writing, it's in books, it's in any media that is created, there is one queer character that just has the answers for the next part of your journey. And until you encounter this person and until they get their face beat in, you're not going to get there. It's not happening.
Is the lone gay the new magical Negro?
The gay is that must be that has to be the trope, right? So characters, some of them rest in peace, who existed only to help our main characters better understand themselves. Did they get their happy endings? Not necessarily. They find love? Oftentimes not. But they helped characters who I understood I was supposed to love. It helped them get to their next moment, right? It helped, and in that, it also helped. I think it did a lot of things. Like it helped the reader identify who the reader is, right? Like because I don't like to watch this queer character suffer, I'm a good person and I'm a good reader because I can register very quickly that this thing that's happening to them is bad, right? And the main character is going to swoop in and like remind me that this isn't right, you guys. And I'm sure the person who wrote it probably had a moment, him or her or themselves, where they realized like I must be a good person, okay, because I'm putting this on paper and I'm sending it to publishing. And you know, I'm sure their intention was good. I really think it was golden. However, I think it speaks more to what the sort of majority might think of themselves versus what we needed for this queer character, what this queer character needed.
Can we, for a second, talk about the lone gay in the books? Because I don't know about you, but I tend not to hang out with the straights in large groups if
Good.
I can help
it. Yeah, good.
And so,
you go ahead, go right there.
and so this idea to me that there is only one person who is, and to be very clear, it is not one person in the group who identifies or is out, but it is quite literally one queer person in the entirety of the friend group or the city or the coffee, just one in the whole universe. And it's so unrealistic, especially in a world where everyone has to create their own family and everyone has to create their community, but even more so queer folks have to. So I don't understand how in the literature there's just the one who seems perfectly content to be amongst friends for long periods of time. Do you have any answers?
Your students didn't know not one other gay person, like nobody else. Can I tell you when Simon vs. the Homo sapien agenda was adapted into that movie, like the thing that attracted me to the book was in the movie there's one character, there's the character Ethan, who was brownish but like not really black, but like something was happening, okay, and I took it, I was like, all right, fine. Had a little perm, right? Kind of presented on the femme side, which I was like, okay, that's very fascinating. What's happening there? Simon had about 3 lines with this person, and then when I went to the book, I was like, this person doesn't even exist. Like, they're not even real. But I definitely hear what you're saying about like lone gay characters, right? We throw them in a world where they are the one of their group, right? They're the one of their circle. And that's definitely characters, not even characters who get to be the center of the story. Those are the characters who sit on the periphery, right? Who they're just the one, which seems not just unrealistic, but dangerous. I'm like, you ain't got nobody. You don't know nobody.
So this book, also YA fiction, is called Anger is a Gift. I forget who it's by off the top of my head, but it gets queer community just so right. It takes place in Oakland, and it's about police brutality and gentrification, blah blah quack quack. So many things that I'd rather it not be about, but
Right.
one of the things that it does get right, it's like the main character is this gay black boy, and his I believe his boyfriend is Puerto Rican, and they're two trans friends, and there's a non-binary friend in the group, and there's one lesbian girl who's bi. It's just this beautiful mix of like brown queer folks, and it I think that what one of the things that writers get wrong is how adamantly queer people fight to form community, and fight to form
Very
community folks that are not necessarily even like them, but folks that recognize what it means to walk into a room and be the other.
yeah.
So to have an entire universe where your gay character never has a break from the straights, it's just it's just by definition an unwhole character, because that character never has a place to feel safe. That
Good.
place character is never in a space where they're just okay and at rest. And I that's just one of the big things I wish writers would get. It's like, if nothing else, give the gay kid a friend, give the gay old man a friend. Like,
Good.
and it doesn't have to be a romantic partner, it doesn't have to be a lover, but like somebody else who is queer to
Good.
just be at rest with
Right.
is so necessary.
Right. Right. I think good writing of queer characters understands like the queer character ain't going to every party y'all going to. You feel me? The queer character ain't going to every spot y'all run into. They can't right now, all right? And frankly, the queer character has other places and other folks where, you know, maybe this group that might be explored in writing and might do something for this queer character. But a good queer character sitting on the periphery does something else on like Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Is doing something else. You ain't seeing them all the time.
Right.
So this one who shows up all the time and is actually solving your issues, very unrealistic. That's extremely unrealistic. But I think you bring up that point beautifully. How is it we are, I don't know, and maybe it's just the part of myself that has actively had to be very involved in looking out for my own safety, being able to read some of these other characters that are sometimes accepted without explanation, brought into the group without any sort of like real conflict whatsoever, and they don't seem to need anybody else who identifies the way that they do. It's extremely unrealistic, right? I'm literally here on the power of community, right? I think the fact that we're like having this conversation together right now is proof that like those folks you're going to meet on your journey are just important, right? Like that's going to be very paramount to your survival. And the fact that that doesn't even sometimes get explored in literature where there's that one character, I think sometimes is telling that a lot of the writing that's done can come up a little higher.
So I'm gonna take one of the questions from the chat.
Please.
Brian asks, have you ever encountered a character that the writer doesn't know is LGBTQ, or perhaps just won't acknowledge the character is queer?
Have you ever encountered a character that the writer doesn't know is LGBTQ? That's a really good question. Have you ever? I'm trying to think of an instance in writing where I might have, and I was just like, no, something about this feels a little
Okay. Just a little.
You know what? I don't know if we mention this author anymore. I think Junot Diaz did a book. Was it This Is How?
You still talk about Diaz in the public?
I don't know what the rules are anymore.
It's fine. Go for it. Safe space.
Steve, please bleep this out where need be. But did this book where the main character was so cognitive of his own sexual experiences in this way that leaned so queer to me, and also came from this like very Dominican like community out of New York. And I'm thinking like, there is something about this that doesn't all the way feel like so many of the heterosexual men that I've known. There's something so cerebral about this character that, I mean, I can't, just walk into a room and be like, I bet he gay. But, if I would have loved a story that explored something, in that dynamic. Somebody who understands, somebody who's willing to understand sexuality so thoroughly is also exclusively heterosexual to me was just like, that's interesting. That's very, very interesting.
So I think that it is incumbent upon a writer to know whether or not their characters are queer, even if they're not, even if that queerness is never mentioned explicitly.
Yeah.
Because it's a part of their identity that makes them interact with the space differently. Like,
yeah.
Any person when they walk into the room affects that room based on the energy and the person that they are in that space. And so to not know means that you're doing a disservice to what could actually happen in the story, what could actually happen in the space. And I think if you don't explicitly, I don't want to say plan that out, because things do occur to you, right, in the writing process. But I think that if you don't ever make the conscious decision, this is a queer character, then rewind. When I write, my default is queer folks, right? And so if I don't make the conscious decision, this person is straight, then I write through the lens that every person is queer, right? And so I think the same is true of straight writers. Like if you don't make that conscious decision, then you are having them interact with the space in a way that straight folks would interact with the space. And also I think that like not being aware, like you said, like makes these characters that are like, no, bro, like you couldn't. So this might be an odd time to bring up Harry Potter, right? But like, you cannot pay me to believe that Ron Weasley is not bisexual, at least. Like you cannot make me believe it. And so I think that like, unless as a writer you're making that conscious choice, then something happens. Like he gets with Hermione, like he never looks at Harry, like ever, not once.
Not one time.
It's just so confusing because you've been in this whole universe and you brought your energy to the book and you're interacting with this world where it's like, of course Ron wants to be with Harry, at least a little bit, but he just, anyway. So I think that there are times when we rely and relax into our default way of thinking, right, as opposed to making conscious decisions or letting the character dictate, yes, this is the space that I want to live in.
That was really good. Do I need my character to explicitly tell me that they're, I've heard arguments for, and I'm not all the way sure where I exist yet. Sometimes I think like anybody who's willing to do that sort of like internal work and that sort of reflection is engaging in something that's sort of like inherently queer. And sometimes I've given a lot of characters the benefit of the doubt, and maybe writers, that like to be willing to understand what's happening within yourself in order to survive, to me is queer, right? If I didn't, I wouldn't have survived. If I don't do it, I will not survive.
Right.
And when I see these characters do it, but also be very sort of rigid in their idea of sexuality, to me is always sort of that disconnect, right? So you're willing to do all of this internal reflection. You're willing to ask yourself these really big questions and go on this journey to better understand them. But you drew the line at, but you're still stuck in like the variations of masculinity, right? But you're still stuck in the idea that, getting this woman back and understanding how you lost this woman is the essence of your existence. I don't know. To me, that's always very weird. But yeah, that is a very good question to consider.
So I don't know that I need my characters to explicitly state their sexuality, but if it comes up, it shouldn't be a surprise to me. Like I shouldn't be, if I'm 7 chapters in and I find out that my protagonist is gay, the book should have followed me and been so well crafted that when I find out, it's not a surprise. So much so, I think that if you have to tell me in chapter 1, then I'm like, what, step your pen game up. Like, what are you,
Right.
what are you doing?
Yeah.
Because we don't require it of our straight characters, you know.
Good.
We don't require, you know, call me Ishmael, I like women. We don't require that. And if it's not something we require of straight folks, then I don't think it's something we should require of our
Yeah.
queer folks.
Yeah. I hear that. I feel that. I don't have access to the questions. I think you might.
Got you. I actually have a question for you. And it is, what is something that might seem small or innocuous about how queer characters are written that just drives you absolutely crazy? Like there are many big things that we've named, but like what's a tiny thing that other folks might look over?
Are you ready?
I'm
I can't
ready.
for this.
Go for it.
Is a sense of humor. I want to see my characters do something other than be tortured by their sexuality, right? I want to see my characters do something other than just like be in an existential crisis over their sexuality. The minute I see a character that is clueless and is also okay with being clueless, like I don't, do you know what you're doing with your life? No? And you're still reading? Okay, well, girl, here we are. I love a queer character with, and I guess maybe there's a line, right? We're good for making queer characters like snappy and witty, and that there's reasons for that. Those characters survive a little bit longer. I'm speaking from experience, you feel me? But also queer characters that can have a sense of humor about themselves I think that's so important. And I also think in order to get where I have gotten, that's been such a skill. And so when I see characters who are able to also do that for themselves and within themselves, and I don't see it very often, and I would like to see it a lot more, I know that this character is speaking my language, and I know that whoever wrote this character wrote it with a care that I can appreciate, because you have a character that understands, like, they're going on the journey of understanding themselves, and they can relax while doing it, right? Having hard and fast answers, maybe not necessary, right? That's okay. And I think that would have given a younger me so much permission to start this way earlier. All those other existential things, they'll solve themselves eventually, and maybe not. Right. Until then, laugh about it.
Or if not, 2020 will come and wipe them all out.
You got about 2 more good years to worry about it.
Right. I think for me, my please stop is just the coming out story in general in literature. Number one, because the books that I read that did have coming out stories in them, because I didn't come out until much later in life. I'm 35, much later.
YA novel, that's fairly late. That's extremely late.
The books that I read that had coming out stories in them, number one, make you believe that it's a singular event.
Good.
And like you come out once and then either life falls apart or life is fantastic. Those are the options. But like this idea that, once you come out to your family, do you or don't you come out at work? Do you or don't you come out to the guy that hits on you at the bar? Do you or don't you coming out once is not a thing. And so then to have a book that makes the experience of coming out like the singular storyline of the gay person is like, well, bruh, you don't have to do that next Tuesday again. So can we just move on? Can she have another plot, another?
That's the climax of this whole story? Okay.
Right? That's all the tension is in the coming out. And so that's huge for me. Also, like this idea that when a person comes out, that the reaction has to be big. Like you've got, the teens that come out in books, and the parents are either like, get out of my house, pack your things, go now, or there's some sort of, physical violence, or the parents like join PFLAG and throw parades and like
They've been waiting for this forever. Yeah.
it's like, oh, I've always known. But like, my parents sent me an email back. They were like, okay, that's where is that reaction?
Right.
In stories. I just can't with the coming out stories anymore.
Yeah, and I think the books I've seen, the recent books that I've seen around, LGBTQ stories, there's so much less emphasis, thankfully, on sort of that like coming out moment, because like, I'm not, a fresh gay either. I'm 30, and I also never had a coming out thing. And I think so many books and so many forms of media making that the peak of like the LGBTQ sort of story really gives a lot of folks this false idea that that's what I'm aiming for, that once I get there, everything will be all right. Baby, once you get there, you're still gonna have bills, right? When you get there, you're still gonna have homework, you're still gonna have classwork, you're still gonna have, maybe a career you're aspiring for. You're still gonna have no idea how to love, right? You're still gonna be
you and all of that.
all your problems will be there. They're all gonna be there. The only difference is you would have had one discussion with a few people who you might love, and that's great. It's delightful. However, it's not really character development. It's an event.
Right. Shannon asks, why do we think we don't see more books about people coming out later in life, and why is it always teenagers? And to that, I will say, I think that goes against our idea of the lone gay providing all of the wisdom for
really
the
good.
straight protagonists, because for that person to have come out later in life means they don't have it figured out. And if they don't have it figured out, then how can they be the arbiter of wisdom in the story?
What good are they really?
what good are they really if they haven't already sorted through something as finicky as their sexuality?
Right. Shannon, I think that's a really good question. Part of it is probably economic. Teen books sell really, really well. And today's teens love the blur of gender and sexuality. And I think those are conversations that are very sort of pertinent to that group right now, especially. And I think that's amazing. I would love to see a lot more stories exist about 30, 40, and 50 plus year olds who are just beginning to name this thing. And I think we'd get some rich stories out of folks who are not 16 and 17 years old and how about not conventionally attractive? Like, can I get a few stories about somebody who isn't, that love waits for them on the other side? Sometimes, the journey of understanding yourself doesn't always have to be a romantic one. And I think when we sort of use these young characters, that romance is just a component. I would love to see a lot more stories of some grown folks who are exploring themselves and are learning how to put names to themselves and their situations for the first time. That would be really, that'd be very important.
I would also love to see more stories where the central storyline about the queer characters, like there'll be queer characters that are well written, but the central storyline is a romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
I would love to see more stories where that isn't the central storyline, like the Mortal Instruments series. There's a boy in that story who's gay. There's another, I want to say he's a warlock. It's a fantasy situation. There's a warlock in there who's bisexual. But the story is not about the two of them getting together. The story is about the part that the two of them play in restoring like the balance of good and evil in the world. In Anger is a Gift, the main characters are all queer, but the story is about fighting for social justice and taking back the high school from those that wish to make it a militarized zone. So I want to see more stories where it's like, here we are, full complex people with a mission. Maybe we're superheroes, maybe we're activists, maybe, you know, any number of things. And this book is not about, oh, and also I fell in love.
Right, right, right.
But the book is about, you know, I brought all of me into this space, and together we did this other thing.
Yeah,
So many more stories like that.
yeah. I hear that. I know maybe it's very easy to get so excited about LGBT characters. We're gonna do everything at once, all right? Self-awareness, love, like we're knocking it out of the park. By 18, this kid has it all. Like they truly.
Right. What I want is to read a book about who I could have been, if only.
This had been a little better. And you know what? That's kind of where I had to get to when I was reading through Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. Was that like clearly this has nothing to do with me, right? This was not written with me in mind. Is this going to be a beautiful story for someone? Is this going to be sort of like meaningful for somebody else? Yes. Did they do what I, as a like queer person, would love to see happen? Absolutely not. I read it and thought, no part of this is realistic. But this is still a beautiful, and it's still warm for someone, and that's important too.
Indeed.
So, if y'all want to fall in love at 17, how about it?
Whatever. I
you
don't.
Good stuff at 29.
I don't suggest it.
Right. I don't recommend.
So one of the books that you mentioned earlier was Perks of Being a Wallflower. Talk to us about what that book does for you.
So that was one of the first stories that one of the earliest stories that I was sort of encountering that had was Patrick, the gay character, right? And you know, now that I can look back on it, I was like, ooh, that was a troubling story everywhere. But at the time, these were characters who existed, and it was a story that I liked. So the overall story kind of is like when you're sitting on the outside of society, right? In this case, it's high school, and you're sitting sort of on the outside of that, and you're allowing yourself to become while you're kind of paying attention to, you know, what's happening on the inside and how you're existing on the periphery. You have the ability to explore yourself in this way that feels, I think the book uses the term infinite, and I really, really loved that idea. Problematically. So what the book did well is it sat all those characters in this idea. What was troubling was wherever there was gay anything, there was also, of course, like violence, right? There was a hateful parent. There was secrecy. There was alcoholism and drug abuse, and there was a character whose narration I was trusting to better understand Patrick, and I never really got that opportunity to do any of that work on my own. I kind of had to trust the narrator's voice to better understand the gay character on the outside, right? The lone gay friend. And so while I honored that story as one of the first I encountered, I also recognized that story that story did something that was kind of age old when we talk about writing gay characters. It made gay something sort of shameful, right? Patrick was waiting on this guy who was on the football team. And all that entails.
Right.
God
bless the closeted jocks and all the stories.
He was an accomplished gay, okay? He landed a football player. So you don't have to tell me that Patrick is attractive. I get it. I get it. But yeah, he just went on this. Wherever there was Patrick, there was also shame. He waited for this guy to love him back, and this guy was never going to love him back. Right. And the whole arc of Patrick in Perks of Wallflower is where you are might suck, but maybe you'll leave and it'll get better. There is no evidence. It got better for Patrick. And so I think living today, you know, I'm challenging, well, what happens when Patrick leaves? What happens when he gets out of what he knows? I'm living it, and I don't know. So good luck, Patrick, wherever you're at.
Wherever you are. I think I would like to see also more stories about what it is to be in love in the closet. Because it is written from this, when I have read it, it's in this place where shame follows it.
Yeah.
And that is a very real thing. But as a person who loved in the closet for quite a long time, right?
For your community, go ahead.
Right. There are also ways in which it is not violent, right? But those are the stories that we see. We also see stories where like the queer relationship is not the one that's centered. The one that's centered is like, okay, maybe this person is also having this whole other affair with this non-queer person, and so the effect that it has on the non-queer person is the main storyline, which is fine because that's also a story that needs to be told. But I don't know, I think we're doing a lot of disservice to folks to be like, hey, if you're not ready to come out, that's cool. Like, love and build community in your safe situation. This is again why in your book you need more than just the lone gay because you can be completely out in one community and in one space, but then not out in these other areas.
Yeah.
And so I would also like to see some more stories about like what is it like to be in love and full, but just not out of the closet quite yet. Maybe, I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's beautiful. I think when I think of like, sorry I didn't mention this, but like James Baldwin's Giovanni's Room, right? It kind of has that idea that like in the space where these men are, they understand who they are with each other, and they also understand that there's a whole life of mine that you know nothing about, right? That I'm still learning as I go. And I guess when we talked earlier a little bit about sort of like, do I have to identify these characters as, you know, in Giovanni's Room, I never got the sense for like, so who's out and who's not out. And, you know, I kind of understood as I was going, and I understood that the world that these men were building together was very sacred to them for a period. And that was important. I love that there was that aspect of like DL, like these people weren't all the way out, but still creating something that was very real for them, that was very meaningful for them. And it was just
her own, but gay and black. Just
and I think that goes back to like that speaks to an author's ability to write characters with love, right? What I gathered from I can't pronounce his last name very well, but Stephen Kobsky, I could be saying that wrong and I apologize. When I saw Patrick, and the more I see Patrick as a character as I get older, I realize more and more that you didn't know how to write a queer character from a place of love. And that makes me ask, have you loved queer folks? Have you done that work of, you know, loving not the story, right? Not the story that you kind of place on them. Not even like, do you think you're a good person because you like queer people, right? Because that's what you made me undergo with this character. Because what Stephen essentially did was you created this whole queer person who then I had to watch his ass get whooped in a book. And right? You love queer people if you do that. You can't convince me you can write from a place that knows how to properly love queerness. And I think that's so important when asking, what is writing a good queer identified character look like? What does writing good LGBTQ characters look like? A good starting place is, are there LGBTQ folks in your life who you actively love? And not just because it makes you feel like a good person. Right. Perhaps you love them because they are. Because those will make really beautiful stories. And people feel those stories.
So then, follow-up that is also coming from the group. So if we believe that writing good queer characters starts from having queer folks in your life that you love, right? Mm-hmm. Then are even queer writers, no matter where they fall in that community, should they seek out sensitivity readers? Should they seek out someone to look at their books and be like, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong?
Try
What
that
is
question. Do queer writers or do just writers in general?
specifically writers who are part of the LGBTQ community? What is our responsibility in writing queer characters?
Ooh, that's a extremely layered question.
That's why I'm glad I have access to the questions, so I get to decide what to throw out to you.
So here's what I think. I think a lot of these writers, whether or not I love them or did not, or love their work or didn't love their work, I don't really know them like that. What they did was they told me what they believed about their capacity to love queer folks. That is my only responsibility when I am writing queer characters. I am not throwing more into these characters than I've thrown into myself. I'm not going to love these characters any better than I have loved myself. That looks different than the way maybe I explored queer characters 10 years ago. 10 years from now, I know it's going to look different. I'm meeting myself where I'm at right now. That's my only responsibility. Some of my characters are trash. I am trash, right? And that's that on that. And I'm willing to stand by that. I'm totally willing to stand by that. I might not do a whole community justice via the characters that I create. And sometimes it's not my goal, especially as a queer writer. Sometimes as a queer writer, my duty is to do justice to myself. It's to give myself the stories that I needed. It's to give myself the moments that I needed. It's to be able to start my day with a question and know that there's a whole blank sheet of paper in which I can explore that question as full as I need to.
You better channel Tony right now. Yes.
That is my only responsibility. I don't know what straight people do when they write. I don't know, but I would say that's my responsibility.
So I think, number one, I hear you and I echo all of that sentiment. I think it is also my responsibility to recognize what my own blind spots might be, or where, not even just blind spots, but where like I don't have access in a personal way to this information.
Yeah.
So then if I'm choosing to situate a character in my universe, then it is my job to make sure that that character I've brought into my universe is done justice. So I'm thinking specifically in this case about trans folk.
Good.
Because that's not my universe. I'm personally not trans. I'm not a lot of trans folk in my life. And so then what I know to be true about trans folks comes from the same movies that the straights watch. And earlier in this conversation, I shaded them for saying, you read books, you watch movies, and then you impose that as fact. Yeah. So I have to hold myself to that same standard and say, if I'm going to bring particularly somebody in the trans community into my writing universe, then yes, I do owe trans people I don't want to say courtesy, the humanity, the dignity of making sure that I take care of a trans person in my universe.
Good.
And maybe I do that by saying, hey sis, hey bro, will you read this for me please? And make sure I didn't fuck it up before are we allowed to curse on the conversation?
I'm quite sure.
So perhaps it is not like a general, to answer the question, perhaps it is not like a general rule. Yes, we should get sensitivity readers.
Good.
But if I am bringing somebody into my universe, it is my job as a writer to take care of them. And that makes it my job as a writer to do whatever is necessary to take care of them. And that might be letting other folks read it. Or that might be saying, hey, this is not a story that I have the right to tell, and put that story back on the shelf for somebody else.
Good. No, I think you're absolutely right. I also there are some folks, and there are some moments where I'm writing where I'm just like, listen, if you don't know about a certain group of people, if there's a certain culture you're unaware of, if there is a certain identity that, doesn't necessarily intersect with who you are, your characters better let me know before I have to let them know, okay? Because if I gotta let them know, it's not gonna be cute. And I think writing from that place of very sheer honesty having characters recognize, like, you know, my understanding of trans folks is, who knows, maybe Janet Mock, right? Which is a very particular type of trans person. My understanding of trans folks might be Paris is Burning, the documentary. And you better be real clear about that before other people catch, like, I don't think you know nearly as much about trans folks as you are claiming to know. If you don't know through some pages. Don't know with yourself through some characters. I don't put pressure on myself to try to know everything about it. Cluelessness makes good stories too. True. And am I willing to be very clueless in folks' face, because I'm kind of assuming when I do that, somebody reading is maybe clueless as well, right? And maybe we could be clueless together as we better understand. As we understand that the trans folks that we've encountered have done so much more than be just quippy, right? Have done, and we don't have any idea what they might be able to do if the world knew how to love them properly. I like to go on that journey with people. Cluelessness is the place where I start from. So, you know, yes, take care of the folks who come into your world. I think that's great. If you don't know how, be very clear, be very clear as you're going that your character is learning too. There are some characters.
Add an athlete to make it clear.
Throw in an athlete, a muscled 16-year-old athlete seems to clear everything up for some reason. But that's very real, and that was a really good question.
So, question from the group: what books or authors have you found that represent characters who speak most deeply to you or who make you feel most seen?
Do I have to go first because you're reading this again?
Yes. Yes, indeed. Actually, I can go first on this one if you want.
Please.
So this is actually not, I might be cheating a little bit because this is not a fiction book, but Io Tillett-Wright wrote a memoir. It's called Darling Days. And it is one of the most compelling books I have ever read in all of my life. I think that he adequately articulates the desire for community in the way that we talked about it earlier, and just the way that he relentlessly fought for a space to call his own. And he did that in the face of much trauma and much drama and all the existential crisis and blah, blah, blah that I hate to see in my fiction. But it's just his, not just his own personal story, but the way that his story made it so clear, one, that community is everything and that you do what is necessary, you do what it takes to find your people and to hold on to them and to love them. But also he puts forth this idea that, like, when people show up and they tell you who they are, believe them. And if that changes tomorrow, say, okay, and believe them tomorrow for what they say they are in that moment. And don't hold them hostage to whatever identity they had when you first met them, because it evolves, it changes, it grows. And it just gives such permission to figure it out and to never stop working to figure it out. And maybe you have this definition of who you are and who you want to be and who you love and what family means and what love and life means. Maybe you have that definition today, but if tomorrow it's different, that's okay. And you can stand up in that, and you can require those people that you carved out as family and carved out as community, you can require that they respect you in that new definition, no matter how many times it changes, no matter how many times it evolves. As long as you are being honest with yourself and not causing harm to anybody, like, you can hold people to the standard of believe me when I tell you who I am. And so read Darling Days.
That is beautiful. I'm writing that down. I'm sorry. Darling.
I hope everyone is. I hope everyone is taking notes. Read Darling Days.
I'm a note queen. Okay, we take some notes. No, that is beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. And we've talked very, very briefly, and I know you're gonna have like pushback, which is okay. I welcome it.
It's fine.
But one of the very, 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 very few times I have truly seen myself represented in, queer characters who really spoke to me very personally and gave me something to hope for. It was Celie in The Color Purple. I don't care. I do not care. I don't care. I do not care. I don't care.
Fine, have your little moment.
I think Alice Walker, especially in that work, was so masterful at writing those characters with so much compassion and so much love and understanding that these characters are, it doesn't matter where you begin, it doesn't matter where you come from, or necessarily how educated you are. Your capacity to believe that you're divine could really be the deciding factor between success and whether or not you perish. That is literally it. And so to see a character crafted with that kind of love made me rethink how I thought about myself and my queerness. Celie never stopped to tell me, there was never a really coming out moment. She loved Suge. She knew that. She, because of society, was here with Mister. She knew that. When I saw Celie not explain herself, I too stopped explaining myself. I was like, there's something so divine and important happening, that I am everything and everything is me, and you're worried about who I'm sleeping with. I've now chucked those questions. Like, if you have questions, like, those belong to you. They don't belong to me anymore. I have bigger parts of myself I'm learning and I'm loving and I'm exploring. And I'm so much further than where I began that I could not stop and really answer petty questions for anybody. And so whenever, and I go back and I revisit it very, very frequently, whenever I encounter Alice Walker's work, The Color Purple, it's beautiful. I feel whole. She absolutely makes me feel whole. Go ahead, argue with me.
I don't want to take your little moment away from you.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I hear you about the not explaining herself. But when I read The Color Purple, I don't read about a woman who chooses not to explain herself, maybe towards the end.
Good. I hear you.
But I read a woman who has this reality about herself and knows that speaking up might become violent.
Good.
So she's not explaining herself. She's being silenced by her circumstances, I think.
I know you're, listen.
But you feel whole or whatever.
And I think you're right? I think that's very much so a component. I think there is a very weird line. And there are some moments I definitely recognize when you're Black and queer, so it's sometimes, now I'm at a point in my life where I can choose if I want to explain myself. And that wasn't the case for a very long time. That wasn't the case for the larger part of my life. And sometimes I get it. It's by omission that I say nothing about myself. It's for my safety. It's so that I can exist in this world that clearly doesn't really look out for me a lot. And I get it. I think you're absolutely right. And that doesn't change the magic of Celie to me at all, or that work. I think if you're somebody who is, and unlike a lot of books that kind of give this idea that like things will be difficult, but you can leave. What if you can't?
Right.
You can't leave. What if there's nowhere else for you to go? And something about that book gave me some kind of solace that, like, let's say if you can't leave, if you can't go anywhere, if you can't readily change your circumstances, which was part of my life for a very long time, can you find some people in the active present you can love right now? That's not a bad starting place. Can you be that place you learn to love in the active present? That's not a bad starting place.
That is not a bad starting place, sir. I might write that down. I will say, I will give you that The Color Purple handles intersectionality in a way that many books do not. Because there are many ways in which books with queer characters are all about the trauma of the character, right? And all of sadness and blah and all they bring. But it does so in a way where it's like, okay, this bad thing is happening because of the queer, but
Right.
this bad thing is happening because of the Black. This bad thing is happening because of the woman. You know, like this is because of the poor. It just itemizes.
You're right. You're right.
Itemizes where the struggle is. Usually because it's all tied up into being the lone gay. So it's like if the lone gay is having the same problem as this guy, then the gay is not the problem. The problem is maybe this other thing. So the color purple does get right this idea that to be woman and poor and Black and queer in this moment in history presents these challenges in a way that it does not for anyone who belongs to many of the others minus one, you know,
Right.
but not in a way that causes us to think about like, okay, which separate part of the identity is actually
Right.
the problem, you know,
Right. Right.
because access to heterosexuality doesn't help Celie, not really, because
No.
her access is Mister. Uh, access to money doesn't help Celie, like, and so the intersectionality is right in the color purple, I guess.
No, fair. Listen, there's more than enough reasons to definitely not it's not love this. I think there's something about that work that found me in a time that felt very full circle. So of course we're all gonna love those books that do that for us. But yeah, that was definitely mine. So
And let me also say for people that are like yelling at me on the inside for not loving the color purple in the way that I should.
that's your ancestors.
That the way that I came to that book was very interesting. Like I read that book because Alice Walker was coming to the campus and I had not read it. So I consumed it in this very like what's the word I'm looking for? In this very obligatory way, I consumed the book.
Sure.
So perhaps when I read it, I was not open to receiving all the ancestral wisdom that I could have gotten had she not been coming to the school 3 days later.
Why do y'all have me on here with this fool? No, look, that's worth exploring. And I'm definitely not. I'm not gonna force you to love the color purple. But you should. No. And to be fair, like when we talk about like, that's my favorite because I've just never I haven't yet seen a Black gay man in a book be loved in a way that I felt really resonated with me. That I wasn't seeing a lot of, I'm thinking, of course, like Elin Harris. Yeah, those books exist. But I never saw anybody who I just really thought like, I don't know. So
you gotta write the book you want to read.
Sure, right. I ain't got no choice. And I think that's half the fun I have in writing, right? Is that finally a voice like this exists, and maybe it's sexual, maybe it's contemplative, and maybe it's everything else, because like I learned in The Color Purple, I am expressive, I am divine, I'm capable of anything. And it doesn't matter if I originally had access to this. It doesn't matter if I'm the smartest in the room. There's a lot of cases I'm not. And Celie told me, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. So I resonate with that because as far as other options for folks who maybe looked like me, I didn't see too many. That pool's really small.
So folks, I know you could probably go on talking for
we could.
a longer time. But if we could kind of draw things. But I wanted to ask, there's a question that someone asked in chat that I think is kind of the complement to this question, which is, where are the stories of queer joy? Ooh, there's a silence.
I don't want to say that they don't exist because I'm certain that they do. But I will say here is where I have found that one of the no matter how well a queer character is written, I have found that the stories tend to be steeped in trauma. And so I'm not saying that those books don't exist, but the ones that do, I personally have not read yet. And so I'm not certain who asked that question, but to whomever asked that question, I'm going to say the story is in your mind, in your head, and you should write it and and share it, because we desperately need stories that are not steeped in trauma.
To add to that, I think a lot of the books that brought me joy were also deemed as frivolous, right? Whenever Black folks were experiencing, whenever Black queer folks and Black queer men experienced joy in literature, it didn't make New York Times bestseller. It was never going to. I think of like B-Boy Blues, which wasn't necessarily my story by any means, right? It was very much so set in the city. It was very much so set in the 90s. One of my favorite illustrators, Belasco, illustrated the cover. Belasco does work as an erotic illustrator. And so you have this really cool collaboration of just like Black gay folks creating this framework that later became, you think of Moonlight, you think of these characters in Pose, that this blueprint for all of these really amazing Black gay stories that are filled with joy, but they don't get acclaimed. They don't get taken serious.
They don't get acclaimed, or the joy is one moment of relief in the larger story that is about trauma, right? Like the whole arc is sad, but yes, there was a party. Yes, there was this one moment of triumph. Yes, there was that kiss that one time, and then AIDS, and then death, and then violence. Like,
yeah. And I have to check myself sometimes when I'm reading stories that involve, LGBTQ folks, and especially like Black and brown, gay and trans folks set in the 80s and 90s. I'm like looking at my watch, like, all right, how many pages have we got? How many? Because I know y'all about to do something harmful to me. I know it's coming. Don't make me love these characters and then do something awful to them. And so we talk about joy, like I think it exists, but I think folks don't clap for those books. I think they don't get the kind of acclaim. And that's neither here nor there.
There's a lot.
Ashley. Oh, I'm sorry. It's like I scared you.
I was just going to say, there is a lot of great work that I'm just beginning to access in young adult fiction. And I'm going to say, as a disclaimer that I always say, is that I read a lot of young adult fiction because I'm an educator, and so I like to be able to recommend books to my students. But also, young adult fiction is like pretty fucking fantastic. And so there's a lot of good work coming out of that sort of genre lately, more so than I'm seeing in adult fiction. That does give some joy to the youth, which is much deserved, much needed. So I feel like in the chat there's some young adult authors to consider. Thank you, Lynette, for that. Because I mean that might be the place to look to for the moment for those kinds of stories.
Good. That's a good point.
The kids are gonna be all right, y'all.
Woo.
Ashley and Michael, thanks so much. It's been a lot of fun. It's sort of been like sitting at a table in a restaurant next to you, and just staying at the table to listen to your conversation, which is sort of what I was hoping for. So thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I would always have you, Michael. You can always come by.
I'm gonna bring a plate. Thank you.
Right.